Welcome, everybody. My name is Charles Werner. I'm with Drone Responders, and today with me from the FAA is both John Meehan and Steve Pansky, and formerly with the FAA, now retired, Mike O'Shea, who I think is primarily here just to give a hard time to John Meehan.
He absolutely is here just to give John Meehan a hard time. I know he is.
My
So,
hobby.
We're
yeah,
sorry
so,
to see Mike go. I have to say it's a loss for me and Steve. But bon
so
voyage, mon ami.
yeah. So for all those that are attending, this will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel after it finishes processing. So usually in a day or so, it will be there. There's Sean Berry says, "Go Army."
Yes, sir.
Sean,
The military academy,
that's
not
not
that
going to
school in
expedite
Annapolis that shall not be named.
that is not going to expedite your approval process, Sean. So don't you guys
It
be trying to get on
absolutely
John's
will.
side.
He moves up to the top of the line.
All right. So today, John Meehan will be our facilitator. So I'm going to turn it over to John. And John, my first question to you is, look, I want one of those DFR waivers. Right?
You
I mean,
do.
it's calling me. They want DFR waivers. Give me the DFR waiver. I want
DFR, yeah. Yeah, and I want a chocolate milkshake, So I the that's a great, and I'm being facetious here, right? But that's a great way to start because most of you who are on this webinar are advanced users. There's obviously some new users, but what we're finding when folks are reaching out to us is they say, John, I want this DFR waiver, as if it's some magical thing. And you have to understand that when you fly in the National Airspace System, this is a transportation system that's in the air. There's rules that apply, and what you're operating under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, and what I think you're asking for is a waiver to at least one of the regulations under Title 14 to do that, right? So when you talk to the FAA, I think it's important for you to understand that we want you to operate. You have to operate under these set of rules, and if you can't do what you want to do under the rule, then you need a waiver for that. And so when people say, "Hey, John, I want this DFR thing," it's always like, well, what does that mean to the regulator, right? What do you want to do? I want to go beyond visual line of sight. Oh, okay. Now we're getting somewhere, right? Now, what else do you want to do? Well, I need to operate over people. Ah, okay. Why do you need a waiver for that? Well, if you're operating under Part 107, right, to operate over people, you need a category compliant drone, or you need a waiver to 107.39. If you're operating beyond visual line of sight under Part 107, right, 107.31 requires you to operate your drone within it's a visual line of sight operation defined in the regulation. I want to go beyond visual line of sight. Well, that requires a waiver to that regulation. You still have all the other Part 107 regulations that apply to you. Conversely, on the other side of the house, public aircraft, they operate under Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 91. Under Part 91, you're going to need a waiver to opt to one of those 700 so regulations called 91-113B, subparagraph B, because that regulation requires the pilot of the aircraft to see and avoid another aircraft while flying the aircraft. And obviously you cannot do that if you're remotely piloting that aircraft, right? So you need a waiver to that regulation to operate a drone in the National Airspace System. So, I'm trying to discourage people from telling me they want a product kind of a waiver, because it to us it's confusing, right? Because DFR, drone in a box, it means 10 different things to 10 different people, and what you're really asking for is, hey, I need a waiver to this regulation, right? So a little bit long-winded there, but that hopefully that kind of sheds some light on that. What do you think, Charles?
I wanted to also share something with you, John. What I get a lot of people saying the same thing, and I ask them, "What do you want to do?" And typically they're not really wanting to do DFR. And I'll just give one example is that the majority of people I've talked to this past week have been wanting the public safety obstructed shielding waiver under Part 107, which gives them the ability to fly a tactical operation for a mile. That's not DFR. And you have repeated to me over and over again, DFR at the FAA means 11 different things to 11 different people. So really focus
Yep.
on the rules and what you want to waive based on what you want to do in your operation. And that people sit back and they have this moment of silence because they suddenly realize, okay, well, maybe it's not DFR one. Now, there's a lot of people that want DFR. Don't get me wrong. You're seeing that, but
Yeah,
that's
but again, right? What do you want? What I think what they're saying is, you know what, John, I'm operating under 107. I need to operate over people. I need to operate over moving vehicles. I need to operate beyond visual line of sight. Can you do that under Part 107? This is kind of how, can you do that under 107? No, not without a waiver or a waiver and a category compliant drone, right? So what you need is you don't need DFR. You need a waiver to these regulations to do what you want to do.
So, John, is there a cheat sheet that tells you what statutes you want to waive to conduct the operations you want to conduct?
Yeah, we have. I mean, I hate to call it a cheat sheet, but we've put out some guidance, not some guidance, but we've put out some help documents. We've sent some things to drone responders and to the Law Enforcement Drone Association, also with our FAA Drone Pros. It's in the Drone Pro Toolkit. And what one of the things we did, you may recall years ago, all the Part 91 folks were getting this thing called a tactical beyond visual line of sight, right? Well, what were they getting? They were getting really a 91-113 waiver out to a certain distance, up to a certain altitude. And so what we did was we realized that a lot of public safety, such as search and rescue, volunteer fire departments, anyone that's a 501(c), for example, they needed that same capability, but they couldn't get that under the Part 91 process. And so we came up with an expedited combination waiver. It's a waiver to 107.31, which is visual line of sight. It's a waiver to 107.39 because we heard that most of you don't yet have a category compliant drone, right? You should have now, they're starting to come out. There's 8 pages of them now. 8 or so. I mean, you can go to uasdoc.faa.gov, and I'm going to ask Steve if you could put that in the chat again, the UAS doc page again. But you can go there and you can look to see what's a category drone for both operations over people and for remote ID. So, that's, and you can get this thing that people are calling the Public Safety Organization Shielded Ops Waiver, and it relies on shielding, which is basically you're staying close to a building or an obstruction, with the idea that as the lower you go, the lower the risk to manned traffic. And if you also incorporate some other items such as an anti-collision light to increase the conspicuity of the drone, if you use ADSB in and you use obstruction shielding, then those risks are mitigated, and we will give you that waiver for that, and that's a waiver to 107.31. Now, let's say you had a category compliant drone. Do you need a waiver to 107.39? No, you don't need a waiver to 107.39 because your drone is compliant, right? You're doing a category 2 or category 3 operation. You need a waiver to 107.31 if you want to go BVLOS. Does that make sense?
Yeah, question here is there's restrictions to police military on U.S. soil, HSI, and other law enforcement from turning off their ADSB.
Great question. So I'm a former Army helicopter pilot, and I want to please get the message out that the days of running around with your ADSB out turned off need to come to an end for your own safety. You can, law enforcement, typically U.S. military, there is a process to get permission to operate without ADSB out. It has to come from local air traffic control, and also there is a process to go through that. But and it was a normalized behavior when I was in the Army 30 something years ago. where we would operate with our ADSB off because we were always worried about getting in trouble from people like Steve Pansky, who were always watching their screens.
Plus, it's not that old.
That's, but again, right, they're supposed to have it on, but they can operate without it on, but we need to, I think, as an industry, to help them realize that, those days are over, because drones are everywhere. And many of you have approached me during conferences saying, my gosh, I was doing some, hurricane response, and those doggone Army helicopter air cav guys came blowing through and scared the heck out of us, and they had their ADSB off. And so that's going to be a process, I think, that's going to take a combined effort to get everybody turning that back on. But it was a great question, because when you're operating in those situations, never assume that everyone is transmitting ADSB. There are also, if you're outside the mode CVAL in Class G, you can operate without ADSB. So there's lots of don't bank that ADSB in is going to give you visibility of every aircraft out there, which is another reason why, under these new waivers that we're issuing to public safety, although we don't require a visual observer, we strongly encourage it, because it always helps for a number of things, reducing workload. I keep citing it, but there's a wonderful Transportation Safety Board of Canada investigation of a police matrice that hit a Cessna 172. They had visual observers, but everybody was watching the really cool 50-inch screen in the back of the Tahoe instead of watching the sky. And it was a clear blue Cavu day. There's no excuse, right? But I get it. But really, visual observers they're certainly not perfect, but it will help the drone operator. Are you a cameraman? Or are you a drone pilot? Because I don't think you can do both well at the same time in a stressful situation, although I'm sure many of you can. But
let me stop for just a second, just to reemphasize it. Right, please put your questions in the Q&A, because it's hard to keep up with the chat, because the chat keeps moving. The Q&A gives us cues to go through and then be able to answer your questions in order. So if you put something in the chat, please put it in the Q&A, so that we can make sure if it's either a question or something you want covered, so that we can see that. I have a couple questions here for you. Is there max distance for BVLOS waiver?
There is currently, under the Part 107 one. That's probably going to change as soon as I get around to working on that. Under the Part 91 waivers, there is no distance. Remember, however, right? Remember what I said earlier, what set of flight rules are you flying under? If you are flying under Part 107, we are not waiving 107.37, which requires you to not be a collision hazard. And how do you do that if you're not paying attention to the airspace? And under Part 91, we are not waiving 91.111, which is basically don't be a hazard, don't be a collision hazard. So remember, and again, right, this is why I know I'm being a pain about this, but I always come back and say, well, what flight rules are you flying under? And when I get the deer in the headlights stare, that tells me that they don't know what flight rules they're flying under. And that's probably somebody who ought probably not to be flying an aircraft in the National Airspace System until they learn about that. Because just like on the ground, right, we have rules on the ground for transportation systems. We have rules in the air, and the safety and the efficiency of that really depends on everybody understanding and complying with the rules that way.
And I think there was a question I think Mike answered earlier. It was saying, does everybody under Part 107 waivers still have to get certified as Part 107? And comparing a difference to Part 91 of everybody being covered. And I think that's a little bit of a concern to me, is that I guess everybody realizes under Part 91, you have to be self-certified, which means you have to then teach all of your people and self-certify. And if there's an accident, they're going to come and look, and you better be good or better than what the
and maintain the records and show that the training is equivalent or better than what we're currently doing under 107. It's so much easier to certify yourself under 107 and put the onus on the FAA for your recurrent training, and to show that you got the consistent and training that the FAA has approved.
You
But there
know,
are some agencies out there that are currently doing their own training under Part 91, and they have pretty good, they have the manpower and the time and the energy to basically, do that. But for most of you guys out there, I'm telling you, just get 107s.
I've looked at a few law enforcement agencies when they go to in part of their because many of them are looking for new officers to join the force, right? And what's interesting is I noticed that in all of the ones I've seen, one of the prerequisites is they have to have an operator's license when they show up, right? So I'm going to use that analogy into the air when I talk, because you're not starting from a brand new person who doesn't know how to drive a car, right? Well, and when I talk to helicopter units, and many of you heard me say this before, but I asked these helicopter units, when you hire a helicopter pilot, what are your prerequisites? And I've never heard any of them say that. They all say, well, first of all, you can't show up and apply for the job unless you already have an FAA certificate. And I asked them, well, why is that? And they said, for a number of reasons. One is not every mission we fly can be flown under part as a public aircraft. We don't want to start with the basics. We don't want to have to teach them the airspace. We want them to walk in the door with that. And we want to focus our efforts on giving them mission training, right? So think about that, right? You're not going to drive a police car at 100 miles an hour until you get certified. And to that point, please help us convey to those departments that think that self-certification under Part 91 means no certification. That's completely erroneous. They're certifying that their pilots are as good or better trained than what the FAA requires. And to Mike's point, they need to be able to defend that in an investigation. And additionally, if you operate as a public aircraft, remember that potentially triggers pilot records database issues. So if any of your drone pilots decide to go moonlight for Amazon or Google or Wing or whoever, they will list you as an aviation employer, and that those 135 operators are required to check the pilot records database, and you're going to get pinged to come up with those records within 2 weeks. You don't have to do that under 107 because the FAA is already tracking 107 pilot issues. So something to think about. Now, the odds are very low, but it is something you have to be aware.
For those of you who don't know, there is a Part 107 public safety organization waiver that is very closely mirrors the Part 91, what people call DFR waiver. So there is a Part 97, I mean, Part 107 side to this too that you can do that may be a way to go, and that's for volunteer fire departments and search and rescue organizations, nonprofits that don't meet the qualification of being a public aircraft operation. Let's go through and answer some of the questions, and then John, why don't we go through kind of the process of how the FAA has taken their approach on this going forward so that they can scale up the DFR in a way that people can understand why this methodology is taking place, and then maybe go through the flow chart and the forms. So,
Okay.
And Mike O'Shea wanted to answer this one. U.S. Navy operates ADSB off in their area. We only see their ADSB active in some occasions. Mike, did you want to cover that?
Sure. So there's a couple things I would do. One is, I don't know if you know, DoD is basically telling their manned aviation units while they're operating CONUS to activate ADSB out after the incident we had at National Airport. However, if they're still not doing it in your area, I would definitely go meet with whoever the safety officer is for that air wing and discuss the issue that you guys are having so that they make it very clear to their operators they need to turn the ADSB out on.
You got it right.
And Mike, is there any formal documentation to that we can have to say this notice has gone out? Is there some way to get a hold of that, or?
No, so it came out from the hearings, the NTSB hearing that was held on the Hill, basically with DoD telling Congress, because Congress is saying, why weren't they operating with ADSB out? And thanks, Dave. And someone just complimented me on my shirt, but it's a retirement shirt. So because of that, they've been told that they're supposed to be operating ADSB out. They may have whatever reasons for not doing it, but you need to sort of establish that communications with that air wing so that you know in advance when they're going to be operating, when they may be operating without ADSB out because of whatever reason. But it's very important for you to sort of to make that communications with them. It's not I was going to say our job. It's not the FAA's job
Well,
to
this is going to be a long-term, in my opinion, having been a former Army helicopter pilot who turned it off
You
all the
were?
time. This is going to be this is a behavior change issue, right? And it's a safety culture issue. And this is going to take a while to change that, because for 40, 50 years, it never was that big of a deal, right? Well, now, and when, it's interesting because when we've had these collisions, when we talk to the manned pilot, they're all shocked that they never saw the drone. And they always thought that the drone pilot would see them in time to get out of their way. And that's a false assumption, right? And so I think you can certainly utilize FAA drone pros to help those aviation units understand that it's in their best interest from a life safety perspective to get that ADSB on. Because, okay, if you're flying border against some narco guys coming across and they're tracking you, okay, maybe so, right? But that's going to be coordinated. If you're flying around, West Point, get it on, because you're not in a security situation. And but that's a behavior change that I think is going to take years to overcome.
And especially a problem during disasters.
It is, because again, it's normalized behavior, right? If you never turn it on, the habit is never turn it on. If you always turn it on, the habit is turn it on, right? So again, I think this is going to be evangelism on everybody's part and help them understand that, hey, it's get the visor down, because we've had these collisions at 400 feet and below and above 400 feet. So they're happening in controlled airspace, uncontrolled airspace, at night and in day. So there's no trend that way. So get the ADSB on, improve your chances of coming home to your family.
And I want to make sure somebody can check to make sure that the link that I put in there works, because sometimes it doesn't work like I think it is, and make sure you can access all the documents. I'd appreciate that. It worked great. Okay. Next question is, any advice on getting modified UAS facility map grids? How do you operate with the airspace authorization and the COW together? The language in the COWs previously stated that you had to use more strict of the two. Will the language change in the COW, or will the COA or the COA?
You're going to have to read that back slowly to me, please.
It's
You're talking as fast as Steve Pansky does.
Something different than the facility map grids in a COW.
Hey, John, let me talk about the USFMs, okay?
Okay, great.
Yeah, so we get this question quite a bit, and the answer is that you need to engage in a discussion with the local air traffic control facility where you're trying to get some relief from what the USFMs are requiring you to retain or sustain. What that means really is visit the facility, obviously make an appointment, visit the facility, sit down with the manager and his staff, and talk about what your needs are and where you need to operate in the conditions of that, and how you will, if possible, mitigate the risk by requesting a higher altitudes locations, whether it's contacting the tower before you operate and then contacting them once you've completed operations, so that they're aware of where you are at that location, and just be prepared to enter into a candid discussion with them on what your needs are. They understand that they're the final really authority on whether they can approve any kind of modifications to USFM or not. And they've, for the most part, been pretty receptive to visits from public safety, requesting specifically requests for locations where they have a high volume of crime, and that you're looking for some relief to be able to get in there with your aircraft and fly those types of operations. Once you can enter into some sort of agreement, I always recommend you probably get it in writing. In other words, just write down, on paper what the agreement is, or an email between the parties what you're going to do, because then you'll go back and apply for a COA in the COA online application process system, the CAPS program, for that for a COA, and the service center where you are, who is responsible for coordinating with that air traffic facility. And that location will either be up in Seattle, Washington, Dallas-Fort Worth, or Atlanta, Georgia. They'll be contacting that air traffic facility and entering discussion with them about your request in your COA for relief in those specific areas. It would help you to obviously maybe put those attachments in the COA application where you had somewhat agreement with the air traffic facility. And that way they can go ahead and use that as a means of entering into their discussions with the air traffic facility to get some sort of agreement or approval, so they can give you that relief from the USFM. That relief trying to think of the word I'm trying to find here, but that relief that you're going to get in conjunction with the COW that would be issued to you would be your means of being able to get relief for the USFM to fly that beyond visual line of sight types of operations. Again, they really are the final authority of the air traffic facility on whether they can and cannot approve that. And obviously, when they first designed these grids, it was really designed around the keeping you clear of manned aviation. And you may not recognize it, but a lot of those altitudes that they designed there were really designed around egress and regress out of airports, and also what they've seen in the way of egress and regress out of off-airport locations like hospitals and locations where they're flying life flight type operations, and they need to provide some level of protection for those those aircraft are flying into and out of those locations.
So talking to John before, what I understand is you can apply for your CAL, but then if you want the facility map grids, you need to go into CAPS and do your COA request, reference the CAL as the waiver that you've received. And if you had it previously under tailored airspace approved by the airport, is include that documentation as well as far as a COA that you may have already got. Is that safe to say?
Yeah. One of the things I see people aren't quite understanding is that when you get this new 91-113 waiver, you can't, if you want something special, like if you want what you had with your other COAs, if it was different than the UAS facility maps, but actually, let me back up. So these new waivers, let's tell them what the waivers do, right? They give you beyond visual line of sight. They give you operations over people with certain equipage, operations over moving vehicles with certain equipage, up to a certain altitude, up to the UAS facility maps grid height. So it's actually a combination of a waiver and an airspace authorization into one form. What you used to call a COA, it's on the same form. It's an FAA 7711-1, but that's what you get with sort of the standard ask. There's a few, I'm going to say 10%, 15% maybe, want something special. When you want something special, you go into it's going to be slower, right? So understand that that's going to increase the time. Why? Because as Steve mentioned, you're going to need to go take a second step. Once you get this waiver, you're going to then go back into CAPS, attach that waiver to a new application to be able to use that waiver at these altitudes, at these special altitudes that you're requesting at this particular location. And then that air traffic's going to go through the process that Steve mentioned. But for the vast majority, if you can live with UAS facility map grid height, you're off to the races. This thing does it for you.
So John, what you were telling me is the FAA came forward to say, how do we do the scaling up of this waiver process for public safety so that we can get these out? That was the ask. We got these backlogs. We weren't moving forward. How could we do that? And the FAA took a step to say, let's standardize two approaches. One was the 200 feet below or 50 feet above the highest obstacle, still within the facility map grids. And the second was above that, up to 400 or the facility map grids, but the facility map grids apply to both. Under the 200, it's ADSB and only, and then the equipage, which means there's not much else you have to do. And in most cases, I know I've seen people get that 200-foot waiver in 3 days. Yep. So because it's standardized, questions are all there.
Well, it's a great point. So, to your point, right? Well, we realized that I think what we say, Mike, is about 100,000 public safety agencies out there, 80 to 100,000. Yeah. How many?
46,000.
But you got to add in the search and rescue, right? Anyway, there's a
That's all of
lot,
them.
right? There's a lot. And most of them, when we talk to them, most of them indicate that Part 107 is great, but we need to go beyond visual line of sight in emergencies. We need to operate over people. So Part 107 got modified, right? We came up with the categories of operation. You can get and unfortunately for a few years, the manufacturers weren't providing category compliant drones. Well, now they are. There's 8 pages worth of them now. And so what we were trying to do is let's try to address the needs of the 80 to 90% of them with what's the sweet spot? If we give them this, that sweeps most of them, it takes care of most of them, right? So that's kind of what we did. And to your point, in fact, on these new 91 waivers, I was told the other day we've had 200 applications in a month and 150 of them have already gone out the door. So, as opposed to years and months before. So I feel like I think we listened. I think we realized that, look, we did some safety risk management panels to say, okay, what are the risks associated with this kind of operation? Collision with a manned aircraft, serious injury to people on the ground. Well, what are some mitigations that can reduce that risk? Well, put an anti-collision light on it, make them get ADSB in, and if they want to go do some really wild stuff, get some electronic detection systems, right? And that's a more complicated operation. But anyway, you get the idea, right? So the goal was how do we help the public interest by enabling these emergency people, these public safety people who are serving in these communities? How do we enable them with some waivers to do their jobs for their communities? And how do we do it in a way that gets most of them done? And we did that by looking at the risks, identifying mitigations, and that's how we came up with the checklist, saying, look, if you'll agree to this, we can process you in an expedited fashion. If you don't agree to that, that's fine. But you go back into the case by case. And by the way, there's only 2 or 3 guys doing this. So, who's getting, you're killing us if you want everything customized. And I think, we talk about this often, right? The enemy of good enough is perfection. And if you can live with UAS facility maps, this works. I think this works. Yeah. So
I just wanted to say that the other thing that changed is that ATO also agreed and worked with flight standards to give you authorization of the airspace, which wasn't done before and had to be done as a separate process. So under these 2 standardized templates, you already get the airspace approval without making a request. Now, I did have somebody text me and said, okay, I'm not understanding. I need a COA to get a cow. And no, the difference is if you want to get something outside the norm that we're discussing, then you're going to have to take that to the CAPS for the COA change for facility map grids. Otherwise, the cow will get you what you need at 200 and 400 based on its approval. But if you want something different, you got to go a different way.
And Charles, they should know something about tailored airspace, that while the FAA had done some approvals for tailored airspace, I know the Air Traffic Organization had sort of made the decision that if it's something we allow for someone, we should allow it for everyone. And so they were trying to get away from tailored airspace just for public safety and do a better evaluation of what do the grids actually mean in terms of altitudes. And I know we had an incident with in Central Park in New York City, where for some reason a grid was 400 feet. Nobody really knew why, the grid was 0, and nobody really knew why. And so we were able to change it to 400 feet. But there, if you have examples like that, there's no good reason for an altitude to be a certain altitude, then you need to let us know, because that can probably be changed, or let the FAA know that probably can be changed.
Yeah, and as Charles knows very well, and right, this is evolutionary, right? incremental improvements, right? You think about where we are today versus where we were a year ago, where we were 7 years ago, right? And the systems are improving and changing, right? Everyone wants the push button, semi-autonomous, off it goes. We want it too. Unfortunately, the technology isn't there yet to do it without some mitigations, right? And so in the meantime, we have to do it as best we can to enable you. So and as Mike said, right, as air traffic gets more comfortable with certain operations, we've seen some of them have adjusted their UAS facility map grid heights. And what was also interesting is you'll see sometimes there'll be a zero grid on in a certain location, and it might be a hospital helipad, or it might be actually an inactive place, and that gets cleared up, and that does change.
So let's go down the questions here real quick. Specifically in regard to Cal, please discuss the need for parachutes and prop guards, or how self-certification may be done.
Yeah, great question. So in the early versions of these new waivers that went out, and I'm going to say like the April timeframe, there was talk about self-certification. That's gone now. That's out in the new version. So you'll want to look at the newest version. And here's the thing, right? A drone of a certain weight and a certain speed possesses varying amounts of kinetic energy. And if they hit a person, depending on the weight and the speed, right? You all know the kinetic energy formula, I'm sure. But it can hurt somebody, right? Or kill them. And, so what are we trying to achieve here? We want to minimize the risk to people on the ground, right? The public safety in particular should be, and many times is, sometimes not, but they should be very cognizant of, we don't want to injure the public while we're out doing our jobs, right? So the whole idea of the parachute comes back to reducing kinetic energy. And so in these waivers, if you want to operate over people or moving vehicles, we require you to either have a category compliant drone, right? I've already mentioned that, or equip with certain equipage. What does that mean? If the drone, and you'll see it in the checklist and in the waiver, if the drone weighs up to 0.88 pounds, we're okay with you putting prop guards on it. We think that'll mitigate the risk sufficiently to do that. If the drone weighs more than 0.88 pounds, you're going to need to equip with a parachute recovery system that doesn't have to be the manufacturer. It doesn't have to be the OEM's parachute recovery system, but it does need to be conforming to ASTM standard F3322-18 or newer. Okay, and why is that? Well, that's because this parachute recovery system will take that 30-pound or 20-pound drone that's falling out of the sky with a fair amount of kinetic energy that can, hurt somebody, and it'll reduce it, right? It'll deploy, because you're going to need to operate at a minimum deployment altitude to give that parachute time to parachute, now to open. Now there's another one in there, and it says, or for life safety events, if you don't have your parachute recovery system and you have them, let's the heavy 18-pound drone that's very popular with police departments, and you don't have this for a life safety situation, we do allow you to do that under this Part 91 waiver. However, we also say in the notes, be aware that not every call out is a life safety emergency, right? The flat tire or the cat in the tree is not a life safety emergency. Flying around an open air assembly of people typically is not a life safety emergency. You should not be flying over people in an open air assembly unless you have a parachute or or a category compliant drone. If you have a life safety emergency, okay. But the bottom line is you have to be able to defend, and this is where it really comes down to, right? The remote pilot in command and the responsible person, you have to be able to defend your decisions, right? And if everybody knows the FAA is reasonable people, right? We're reasonable people. But you have to be able to defend your decisions, right? Nobody can make perfect decisions, but if you say, look, here's why I did what I did, okay. But also bear in mind, right, that we're not, more than likely, we're not, particularly for public safety, particularly those in cities or locations where they're not the most popular people in the city, right? So you have to be very careful about what happens, not just with the FAA, but who might follow the FAA when the situation's done.
I'd just like to add, I think it's important to understand the liability issue here, really, for your organization when you're going forward. I've told John this a lot. I've said, this is me talking as a public safety representative. It's not okay for us to kill one to save one. And I hate to say it, but as we get busier and we start using this more often, we're going to have crashes. And agencies that have DFR programs have already had crashes. And some of the things that I've heard have been scary. And that in some cases, when the bird went down, they held their breath. That's not a safe place for us to be. And I liken this to responding to an emergency. We as public safety have the right to run through red lights, traffic signals. We have the right to go faster than the speed limits. As long as we are having an audible warning device and displaying our emergency lights, but we can still only do those things when it's safe to do so. And if we do it in such a way that it's not safe to do so, we're liable for those actions. So I think that's just an important thing. I know a lot of people will disagree with me, but we're in the national airspace now. And the FAA's got to take care of what's in the air and what's on the ground. I've heard that loud and clear. And the reason that we are where we are today with the FAA is because the FAA has become more trusting of public safety, understanding our missions, and now we need to put ourselves in their shoes in the same way. And I want to just clear up one thing is in this Part 91 and Part 107 is that now you're not restricted to public safety missions as it was in the past. And the only difference is that emergency life-saving mission applies if you're not going to do the parachute, and it's for a very limited specific time. So that's
yeah, that's well said.
Yeah, and
still public
you can
safety
train,
mission, just not an emergency mission.
Right. And if it's not an emergency, why are you flying over people? Right? I mean,
yep. So let's go through the questions here real quick. Does the waiver needs to state a specific aircraft, or can we request any UAS under 55?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, no, we don't. We're aircraft agnostic in this, and you'll see on the checklist, we're not asking you to name the make or model or anything. It's really the provisions are based on the weight, the total weight of the aircraft.
But they still have to be registered.
Yes, you do have to be registered. Why? Because Title 14 applies, and under Title 14, all aircraft must be registered.
And that would be applicable to shielded waiver as well, correct? The same question.
Registration?
No. The first question is, as far as, does it need to say specific drone in your application for? Correct.
No, we don't need that information from you.
Okay. Any idea what the current turnaround on 107 BVLOS waivers, private organization working in direct support of public safety efforts and held up by our waiver submission sitting in submitted status? This waiver application is for 2 miles in Class G at 200 feet with ADSB only using a category. I guess it's a category compliant aircraft.
So you want to, yeah. So you're asking for something that's out of the ordinary, right? And so 2 miles is a long way. So I think in that particular case, that's probably being treated as a case by case. And it sounds like a non-public safety person who you can certainly apply for a BVLOS.
I don't think they're talking about
shielded ops waiver.
I don't think they're talking about the shielded ops. I think they're talking about the DFR-like version of Part 107.
So a Part 107 waiver to 107.31, 107.39, 107.145 using electronic technology to provide detection and avoidance. Is that what you're what you're calling DFR in that case?
I
Again,
don't know.
right? I'm being kind of snarky here, but it's because they're all different, right? So
No,
every
I
one
don't
of
think they're saying DFR. I think they're just a private organization that wants to get beyond visual line of sight flights.
yeah, okay. So that, thank you, Mike. So yes, any Part 107 entity, you don't have to be public safety to apply and obtain. We have issued a number of 10731 waivers to non-public safety entities operating under Part 107. Absolutely, definitely. What you need to do is to go into FAA Drone Zone, pick the regulations you need relief from, and you have to answer all of the waiver safety explanation guidelines. And if what I recommend is you copy them, paste them in a Word document. First question, here's my answer. Second question, here's my, and there, if you want to go BVLOS, that's a waiver to 10731. And there's 40 plus questions that you need to answer. And if you don't answer those, typically they will reject them immediately or send back a request for information. But yeah, so look at the waiver safety explanation guidelines. Most of the applications that I see coming in that get sent to me, I had to do like 20 reach outs last week because the entity didn't ask for the expedited waiver, which that's not available to civilian entities, but they didn't follow. They were asking for something where they needed to follow the waiver safety explanation guidelines. They didn't do that, so it gets bounced immediately.
So, John, who should they reach out to check the status of their application?
Yeah, that's a great question. So under Part 107, they could reach out to the UAS Support Center, and they may be able to have visibility. These new 91 waivers, we don't yet have there's no sort of portal to go to check the status, but most of these are getting turned around now in under a week. Now the more sophisticated ones, the special ones, I don't have a good answer for you there.
So help at UAS.
UAS help
at FAA.gov.
UAS help at FAA.gov. Yeah.
We'll send an email to them, and then you'll get either Steve Farr or one of the guys there, and they'll be able to track it down, see what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, there was a
But
previous.
if it's less than 2 weeks, give the team a break, because I tell you, it's the same people, and the more requests you get in, right? Where's my waiver? Where's my waiver? That's less time that one person has to do the waivers, because unfortunately.
All right, next question. There was previous discussion around all COA CALs moving to drone zone and away from CAP system. Has that happened yet? If so, do
No.
we know? Reply no. Right now, it's still the email process for the Part 91 CALs. It's going to be a combination of that and the COA process and CAPS if you're doing something different above the facility map grids. And if you're doing the
Yep.
Part 90s, Part 107 waivers, then
FAA
it's
drone
drone
zone.
zone.
Yep. FAA drone zone. Yeah.
So, Steve, when is CAPS going to change to something new?
So I used to cross my fingers and say CAPS is going to go to the new CADS program, which is basically COA in drone zone. And my fingers crossed used to say the winter of this year. However, my fingers didn't help at all, because I think because of the budget constraints and things going on right now, we're probably looking at possibly the fall of next year, 2026. And again, my fingers are only crossed about that.
Yeah. I mean, in the current environment, all bets are off. Frankly, I did see a question here that volunteer search and rescue looking to operate BVLOS up to a mile. What you need is the waiver. You need to operate under Part 107. So I recommend you apply for the Part 107 Public Safety Organization Shielded Ops waiver. That's a combination waiver to 10731, 10739, and 107-145. Go to Drone Responders, and they have some information that will help guide you through how to do that in FAA Drone Zone, which is not the easiest system. We understand that, but you can do that, and the turnaround is pretty quick.
Our agency has a COA within the last year. Do we need to resubmit for a CAL?
Yeah, great question. So the magical tactical beyond visual line of sight and the first responder beyond visual line of sight COAs, that while they're still active, they are not going to be renewed. When they expire, you're going to need to go to this new waiver. But in many ways, I think you'll find these new waivers to be easier to understand. And in many ways, they also give you more operational flexibility.
And they don't require you to do reporting on a monthly schedule.
Yeah, great. Yeah, another great question. So no NOTAMs, no reporting other than if you have an incident, accident, or occurrence, of course. But yeah, there's no more of that monthly reporting that you all loved so much.
And they're good for 4 years.
They are good for 48 months. Yes,
Yes,
that's
that's
another
right.
one. Yep.
So you can apply automatically with even right now if you have it, and you'll get the extended 4 years and the other benefits that come along with the CAL that you didn't have. Unless, of course, you have tailored airspace, then you'll have to take your CAL and get it and take it to COA again to do that process.
Yeah.
But if you want to apply for that today, even though you have an active tactical or first responder beyond visual line of sight, it doesn't stop you from doing that and applying. And if you get, obviously when you're approved for that and you have the equipage, the right equipage for the aircraft, you can always go back to the FAA and say, hey, we'd like to no longer have to do monthly reporting. So we'd like to actually cancel our current COAs so we can operate under the one COA. And I noticed there was a question there about having difficulty in doing their monthly reporting in CAPS. Yes, CAPS has been experiencing lately some slowdowns, seems to be running slower than usual. And we are aware of that.
Yeah, let me, I know we're getting short on time, so I want to address Kenny's question here too. The list of organizations to notify, it's a one and done, Kenny. So the idea is that for those entities who are operating low level in the same area where you're going to be operating beyond visual line of sight up to 200 feet, right? This is part of that behavior change. For them, right, to let them know that, hey, just so you know, we're going to have drones up to 200 feet in this area, and maybe you want to fly a little higher. Maybe you want to turn on your ADSB out. Maybe you want to get those visors down. Maybe everybody wants to get those anti-collision, but it's a one and done report there. We don't expect you, but the idea is to give them awareness. And the military reps who work with us say they thought it was a great idea because they can then distribute that information to their folks out there as well. I'm not sure what Paul Ginsburg's question is about remote ID. Remote ID is a different subject. I'm not sure I understand that. If you're a manufacturer of a drone, it has to be built with standard remote ID. It has to be on the FAA accepted list. That's the same web page that Steve had provided there. So we not quite sure. Now there's some exceptions, but
yeah, they're not required to build remote ID into a DoD specifically manufactured bird.
right. But
yeah,
and if you have more questions about that, we could certainly, in fact, Paul, you should reach out to the US Support Center, express your questions, and they will forward that to the appropriate person. And so let's get back to these waivers, which I think the vast majority of folks want to talk to. Any other questions I can answer for you?
Let's see. We have small jet port in our area. Where to go? We experience many of the aircraft not having ADSB. Is the FAA looking to require small planes operating under 10,000 feet to be equipped with ADSB?
The rule for ADSB has been out for how many years, Mike? 20, 30, right? And I don't see that rule changing. They are required to have it on for certain things, but certain aircraft are not required. And I think you should assume that not every aircraft will have it. I think that's the long and the short of it.
it's only required
ADSB
for
in is
operations
great.
in a mode CVL. So I mean,
Yeah.
depending where your jet port's out, if it's not in a Class B airspace, it's probably not going to be required.
Yeah. And again, right, so, the prudent pilot will stay as low as he needs to get the mission done. Because the lower you are to obstructions, the less likely manned traffic will be in that same neighborhood.
if I was an airport operator and I wanted to reduce the liability for operations around my airport, I would require that anybody landing or taking off from my airport have ADSB out. That's just Mike O'Shea.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying
Right.
to read these really quick here. Is there appetite to get a one-to-many waiver that would be included in the BVLOS CAL? John, if I talked about this, it really gets down to the technology as far as what it can do and what it can't do. So it really depends on that.
And that is such a, I mean, we do issue 107.29 waivers, and I forget the other numbers, 107.25 for the drone light shows. So we are issuing those waivers, right? But the one-to-many concept, again, right, that's the custom one, goes into the, you can request anything, but realize that if, the more you, if you can't live with these 80%, 80-20 things, the more time it's going to take and the more discussions it will take. And
All right.
but it's possible,
It's possible,
pretty much
and
anything's
you'll
possible.
prove that you're having the reliability of the system and all that kind of stuff. In response to what Steve said about operations above USM grid operations, this individual spoken to the local ATC management and TRACON, who both approved the grid operations. But when asked in my 107 wide area airspace request, whoever approved the wide area waiver restricted us to publish. How do we work that out?
So that's an easy one because the memorandum between ATO and flight standards, or AVS, aviation safety, basically restricts to what they can do in terms of altitudes. So you're going to have to do it under Part 91 if you want to operate above those facility map altitude values, or outside of that COW agreement, because the COW has specific limitations on what flight standards can issue to public safety.
That goes back to what we said before, that if you're going to do that, you're going to have to go through the COA process to get that, with the reference to the CAL that you have, to get that new airspace that you want.
Yeah, I think I also saw that he asked for it and they denied it. So I don't understand the whole thing, but I know who Andrew is, and I'm sure he'll be reaching out to me later. So
And I want to also,
Sacramento?
yeah. Gosh, I lost that thought.
No, but to Andrew, so the way that happens is you make your application for that new airspace. It goes to the regional service center. The regional service center coordinates with the TRACON and the local air traffic facility. And if any one of them says no, it's no.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is, if you submit for a COW, there's an agreement between ATO, the Air Traffic Organization, and Aviation Safety, which Flight Standards is under, as to what they can issue. And they cannot issue anything in controlled airspace above the facility map altitude values per that agreement. So
Correct.
if you want to do something outside of that agreement, outside of the COW, you're going to have to go the typical Part 91 process.
Yeah, and this is, I know you all like to use the word COW, but it's actually a waiver and an authorization. It's both. Because that airspace authorization is up to the UAS facility map, is included in this document.
So if to 400 feet is a COW, is to 200 feet a CAF.
Absolutely,
Right,
yes, yes.
I'm here all week,
It-
waiters.
Yeah, it's
I
veal.
just want to make sure people understand too, when you're applying for this stuff now, no longer 20-page CONOPS. That's all out. Just give the quick CONOPS paragraph or two of what you're going to do. This question here says, I'm working on a CAL application for local police and fire departments in our city. What's the best way to express the multi-department intent of the initial letter in the FAA? Do I need a separate application for each department, or can we do them together in one application?
Well, yeah, so that's a great question. So in these sample letters, if you write more than 2 paragraphs of your CONOP for these basic, checklist ones, you wrote too much, because these are expedited waivers that we can issue based on pre-evaluated risks, hazards, and mitigations, right? So you don't need the War and Peace Volume 1, Volume 2 CONOPS that you need. Now, you might need that for a more sophisticated, customized solution, but for these expedited ones, you don't need that. I forget what was the second part of the question, though. There was something
They
in there
want
that
to
I
know,
wanted.
since they're applying the fire department.
Oh, yes.
Department operating.
Yes. Yeah, great question. So I mean, you can, who's the responsible person for that entity? That's the entity. You know, I would recommend you drive it down to the lowest level. If you've got now it could be a volunteer fire district, and if the chief of the district is willing to be the responsible person for everybody who flies under that waiver for the district, by all means, sign that, right? I have a feeling that between them and the risk manager, they're going to say, no, 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 no. I want the company, I want it down to the company, right? So, and remember that if anybody who flies under your waiver or under your COA or this COA or COW, whatever you want to call it, right? Anybody who flies under that, the responsible person is responsible for ensuring that that person knows what they're doing and is competent and complies. So if you don't know how that guy maintained his drone, how are you going to do that, right? If you don't know that person's training in that department, how are you going to do that, right? You're taking a big risk, in my opinion, because you're representing to the FAA, and the FAA is giving you this based on your representation that you got it under control.
Okay, we're gonna
So
jump through these. We got a lot more. I'm gonna try to cover them all. We've got until we actually have 5:30 on as far as the program goes. But our shielded flight operations capped at facility map grid height. Yes.
yes.
What helps?
The answer to the last question is a city can apply for a COW that would cover both their police department and fire department.
Yes.
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 What
But
The cow would be written under the city name, is what it is.
it would be written for the city,
Correct.
and the
For
city
use
is on the hook.
For the use by the police and fire department. That's how it would be written.
And emergency management or whoever else.
Yeah.
Or whoever else. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
What helps the department determine if they should have a COA or just get Part 107 with the COW? Well, first of all, it's kind of confusing here. The COW under Part 91 is different than Part 107, and the COA is different if you want to do something beyond the norm. So it really gets down to what it is you're doing in your operation to determine which one you need.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can do whatever you want to do under either set of rules, right? So if you want to operate under Part 107, you can get pretty much everything you could get under 91. And eventually, and the whole idea, the way we're working towards is, hey, these are the same risk profiles, right? They're the same. There's the same pilot flying the same drone. It's the same risk, right? So we're trying to get them to look awfully similar. So, and the other reason is, many of you are not eligible per the law, 49 USC 40102A41. Right? You don't meet the definition of a public aircraft, so you can't. 91 is out for you, but you can. And I want to be this is really a great way to kind of wind down, but the operational capabilities can be nearly identical under 107 or 91. And so what we want you to do is really have a discussion in the leadership, if you're eligible for both, is figure out what's good for you. Now, one example, under 107, to go over people beyond visual line of sight and over moving vehicles, you need a waiver to 3 regulations. In fact, and if you have a category compliant drone, you only need 1 regulation to be waived. To do the same thing under Part 91, under this new COW/A, you need a waiver to 9 regulations. So what's simpler for your crews to know? There's fewer regs under 107. If you operate under both, your pilots have to know both sets of regulations. I mean, I always encourage 107.
Is it safe to say that all the other COAs and stuff that are out there are not necessary anymore? It's like the jurisdictional COA, the blanket COA, the tactical beyond visual line of sight. Based on how we're seeing this go forward, are we going to see those kind of merge into one as to be simplified?
I think that's the objective is to come back to what do you need? What regulations do you need? Let's make this plain language. Let's make this work for most. But yes, you're going to see those eventually sunset.
And then did somebody answer the question that Paul Ginsburg says AC 89-1 means of compliance and 2 says declaration?
Again, that's a remote ID question, and reach out to the US Support Center, and we'll get you that.
And that ends our questions for today. Now, the documents are in the link are in the chat. So that should give you the folder that has all the documents we've been talking about. Hopefully you can make sense of what that is.
It's still evolving, so you may see some changes. So check back frequently. I mean, we're still tweaking these things.
How will things change with the advent of 108? Wouldn't we all like to know?
Wouldn't we all like to know? That's a great question, Tim, and hopefully
And
we'll
are we
find
thinking
out.
about 109?
Yeah, we have no insights on that, and we'll.
I think what we've heard
we'll
is they did the rulemaking to listen to people as to what 108 should mean. And I know from we as public safety, we indicated that we wanted to make sure there was more conspicuity in the airspace so that we could actually see those other aircraft that are flying and other things. And we're hoping that Part 108 will cover a lot of things. But the rumor is that there will be some comments, a draft rule put out with comments. So we're hoping that happens soon. And this administration was very supportive. If you remember, they did the IPP in the former administration as president. So,
well, and let me tell you, for this industry, for these folks here, please read it when it comes out, and please do comment. I mean, and we read it. Believe it or not, we read every single one, and we do action them. So, and I know I've talked to the rulemaking team on past stuff, and they said, there's a few good ideas that come in that actually influence the final rule. So it's no joke. Please do look at it when it comes out. I'm also going to look at it because I don't know what it says. I'm not on that, and it's very close hold. I'm looking forward to it as much as most of you are.
so with that, I think we have covered all the bases for now. Thank all of you all for attending that are still here, and we'll have more information probably next month with a few more changes and updates. And hopefully we can put together maybe a little bit more of a framework guide that we can make available to you in the next week or so.
Thank you all for what you do for our communities.
Thanks to John Meehan, Mike O'Shea, Steve Pansky, as always. Appreciate everything.
Mike, you look way too relaxed. I'm sorry. You just look too relaxed, doggone it.
It's weird because technically I'm still kind of with the FAA until September 30th, but so I'm just sitting here relaxing and enjoying my time.
You see, this is what happens when you retire. Your mind goes.
Goes.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Goes. I think that was gone a long time ago.
Oh, dear.
All right. See you guys.